Okay, there you go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session. So, my name is Maxi, and thank you so much for joining me live today. In this session, I will be going over the essentials of Engrosser Script. We will be looking at some exemplars from the main proponents of this script back in the day. And let me know as well if my audio drops. Yeah, so we will look at exemplars. We will cover some time movement exercises. What else? We will construct our basic strokes depending on your personal preferences. And finally, we will look at how to write the lowercase alphabet. So because we have a lot of ground to cover and only about 2 hours to do it, I won't be going over everything, but I'm gonna do my best to equip you with what you need to get started in creating your engrosser script. Also, this tutorial is aimed at all levels, whether you're new to pointed pen or you've been practicing for a while. I do hope that there's something you can take home from today's session. I would like you to focus not just on practicing along, but also on training your eyes to see, because you can't really see what you can't see. That to me is probably one of the most exciting things that I've experienced as a calligraphy student. Okay. Some ground rules. Please stay on mute during the session and use the chat to talk to each other and to ask questions. And if you have a question, please begin typing it with like 3 question marks at the beginning so that it will be easy to catch. And if you see a question from another person that you might know the answer to, I highly encourage you to help each other out and post your answer. Um, while I'm the one leading this class, I myself am still learning and I don't know everything. So I'd love for us to learn from each other. And then if there are unanswered questions, my dear friend Ekta here will be helping me compile them and we will get to them near the end of the session. If we do run out of time for Q&A, I'll make sure to get back to you as well via an IG story or via email. And we will do about a break about 45 minutes from now, right before tackling the letters. And then tomorrow, I'll send you the link to the recording, as well as I have a survey form that I'd love for you to fill out. The survey form is completely optional, and what it has is I will be gathering your feedback based on this session, and also I'm gathering interest for my next project, which is a community style of learning where I will lead teaching sessions module by module, and I will also facilitate group feedback, and I want to provide a forum kind of space for Q&A to a cohort of members. Because I think there's real value in accountability and showing up regularly for practice. And I think learning as a group has the benefit of having multiple perspectives, and it gets you to improve your calligraphy faster. I will send that link later. And now let us get started. I will take my face away from this screen and share a different one. 1 second. Good morning, good morning. Okay, is the spotlight showing correctly? You should see the first page of my handout. It says the essentials of Engrosser Script.
Yes, it's okay, Maxi.
Okay, thank you. All right. Okay. I want to get started by talking about what is Engrosser Script. So Engrosser Script is a style of calligraphy that was developed in the USA. over 100 years ago. And we can't really talk about it without first talking about where it came from. It was derived from another script called English Roundhand, obviously from England, based on the name. And this is a cursive script. This, by the way, is a page of Dr. Joe's book, Script in the Copperplate Style. Thank you, Dr. Joe. It is a free book that you could find in Zenarian.com. Okay, so English Roundhand is a cursive script. This is the one that says virtue and friendship at the top. It is, so you can see the letters are connected and it's characterized by its rounded turns, hence the name roundhand. So the tool is different between the two. Engrosser script was developed with a pointed metal nib, while for English roundhand, it was historically written with a broad-edged quill pen that was narrowly cut. Both of them have thin and thick strokes, but if you notice, English roundhand is not as contrasting as Engrosser script because of the tool. Also note though that you can write both scripts with metal nib. The other main difference between the two of them is that English roundhand is handwriting, while Engrosser script is more like drawing. Engrosser script is executed in a more deliberate, precise manner, and you can think about it as engraving on paper. It's historically used on formal documents like diplomas, certificates, so it was quite important that this script look formal, traditional, legible, consistent, and precise. And to help with that precision, engrosser script is usually drawn methodically by breaking down each stroke and lifting your pen from the paper to help getting those consistent and precise strokes down. Note though that it's not really mandatory to lift, especially if you personally feel like it disrupts the flow of your script. The pen lifting motion came from penmen copying how metal engravers struck their letters or their designs onto copper plates. And speaking of copper plates, I'm sure you've heard the term copperplate script. That's where the copperplate script term came from, the process of transferring designs and drawings and scripts, reproducing them using the intaglio method, which uses copper plates. And the way that I think about it is that copperplate script is an umbrella term. It covers many different styles of script, including the very specific engrosser script. Now I will go to the handout again. So on the first page of the handout, I've given you sort of like a gallery of exemplars on engrosser script coming from these famous calligraphers of the time. And don't worry if you don't know who they are, that's okay. These are just a few of them. There's a lot more actually. But I wanted to show this to you to emphasize that there is more than one look to this script, and everyone will have their own little nuances and their own preferences. For example, you can see how Baird's shades are more delicate compared to how Howe's script is. And if you compare Howe versus Zaner, Howe's bottom terms are really sharp. Like look at the bottom over here versus how rounded these are for Zaner. These are all perfectly acceptable styles of engrosser script. And instead of me imposing one particular style on you, I invite you to experiment while focusing on the overarching themes and the essence of the script, which to me are consistency, precision, legibility, and it being a formal, traditional looking script. Okay, there goes our quick background overview. Let's dive next into a little bit more of detail on the second page of the handout. Thank you for putting the link in the chat. Okay. Um, so in this second page, I've also given you sort of like a smorgasbord of basic strokes. These are also from different penmen or teachers. We won't go over them all the details, but I'd like to talk to you about a couple of things. Okay, so what do they have in common? First, there's a stark contrast between the shades and hairlines. You could definitely see how thick the shades are versus the hairlines. Um, and that's because of the hairline coming from a metal nib instead of a quill. And there is a sense of harmony or a sense of belonging together, especially if you look at um, Lupfer's examples here for C, E, O, and A. He is illustrating how these letters can come from, or how these letters are so similar with your letter I. You can superimpose them. And there's also some form of symmetry in all your strokes. So let me pull up my illustrations. The most obvious of which is the rotational symmetry, meaning if you rotate it upside down, you get the same result. So for your underturn and overturn here, the shade here with Lupfer, and even on your compound curves. If you turn it upside down, it's the same exact shape. Aside from the rotational symmetry, there is also reflectional symmetry, meaning if I divide the shape in half, let's look at Zainer's here, for example, the pink line over here. If you divide the U shape in half, it's the same exact shape in the the left and the right side are the same exact shape. Not necessarily the shade, but the negative space and the U shape. So same for Lupfer here at the bottom. Look at the pink lines. Note though that that pink line isn't necessarily on slant, like on the same slant of your shade, but the symmetry, the idea of symmetry is there. And the other thing that I wanted to talk about is before we do our strokes, there are a couple of varying things that I wanted to point out. One about the shade and one about the hairline. So, oops. For the shade, um, you could choose to have a straighter edge on the outside of your shade, like Zainer's here, or you could choose to pull it in with a slight inconspicuous curve, like Lupfer here. He illustrates that your shade curves inside the middle a little bit. Let's see, where's another example here? Both are fine as long as the curve is not overdone. I would like you to try both ways and ask yourself which looks more pleasing to you, and which method can you do more consistently, being, engrosser script, a consistent script. Also note though that if you do the curved method, it could be hard to eyeball every time how much you curve. So for simplicity today, I'll try to follow the straighter edge when I pick up my pen and paper. What is important for you to focus on though is you maintain the same slant, the same heft or same shade thickness, and you taper smoothly to one side. Oops. You taper smoothly, and it's not like a triangular shape at the bottom, not like this, and not like a wedge shape like this. You should have a curve on that side. And the other thing that I wanted to point out is about the hairline. Okay, let me just remove that. Okay, so I mentioned symmetry earlier, how Zainer's is symmetrical when you divide it in half. Let's talk about the hairline. You could choose to have it pretty much on slant, this upstroke over here. Okay, I'm shaky. This upstroke over here is pretty much on the same slant as your main shade. You could do that, it's up to you, or you could choose to open it a little bit wider, like this from Lupfer. It's not exactly on the same slant, and this is from Lupfer as well. Most obviously here from Jones, the shape opens up from really narrow to really wide. And yeah, ask yourself, can you still maintain some sort of symmetry to it? Can you replicate it? And then is the negative space the same for all your other strokes? You could choose your curvatures or your turns, your bottom turns over here. So Zainer's has a really rounded bottom, while Jones on the extreme end has an angular bottom. It doesn't really matter as long as you remember that your hairline is part of an oval, or you could call it an arc. I want you to remember that that oval is going to be a part of an arc, and Again, it also doesn't matter what kind of oval you're aiming for. I have a few different ovals that I drew here because I've seen illustrations where the oval is fitted inside the counter space like this, or you could illustrate it like an oblong like this from Lupfer, or I've also seen instructions that show this. It doesn't matter what kind of oval that you imagine. What's important is for you to remember that your hairline is an arc and not a straight line. Okay, so when we construct our basic strokes in a minute, after some time movement exercises, we'll draw a couple of choices where the first family of basic strokes has more rounded turns based on, for example, Zahner or maybe Lupfer, and the second has more angular turns, being inspired by Baird or Jones or Howe here at the end. And then, since we don't really have a lot of time, when we get to the actual letters or alphabet, I'll be employing my own personal choice of it being somewhere in the middle between, it's not too round, it's not too angular. And I'll leave it up to you to follow which style you prefer more and to experiment with your basic strokes. Okay, so with all of that said, I know you're all excited to get to writing. Let's grab our pen, paper, and ink, and I will change my camera here. Stop share. Okay. And I will spotlight myself. Okay. So I was just warming up this morning before the class, but I will be grabbing the third, I think this is the third page of the handout. And I don't have a colored printer, so I highlighted the colors from the handout. Okay. Give me 1 second. I'll just take a sip of water. Okay. The first thing that I want to say is so engrosser script is typically written on a slant, like the shades. And then when I say on slant, I mean that's the degree of slope that your main shades or your main strokes, the shades, follow. The guidelines that I provided are on a 55-degree slant. Usually it ranges between 50 to 60. It's up to you what slope or slant you want to follow, but the guidelines that I have here are 55 from the horizontal. Let's do a little bit of a quick warm up just to check that whether I positioned my paper on slant. So what I usually do is I make sure that my hand is comfortable, my wrist isn't bent on the page, and personally I like to put my forearm on the table completely. I know some people leave their elbow off the desk, and that's completely up to you. So let's just write a few slant lines. And if you feel like it's uncomfortable for you to reach that slant line, feel free to rotate your paper. Another general principle that you need to follow for slant is your nib, the direction of your nib. Ideally, it's on the same slant, it's aligned to your slant, like so. Don't try to write like this because I mean you still can get the desired result, but it's going to put pressure on the two tines in an uneven manner, and it's gonna wear them out faster. So try to pull down in the direction of your slant. What else? Stay also in your comfort zone because you will probably find that if you write from left to right like so, at some point you will find that it's you're gonna have trouble keeping with the slant. So personally, what works for me is I stay somewhere in the middle, and I would move my paper underneath my hand and just keep myself in that comfortable spot. Okay, so let's look at the first row. I would like you to dry your nib, and let's do some time movement exercises. I feel like it's really key and important to understand the way that your nib works to get the best results. Oops, oh no, my pen fell down. To get the best results on the page. So on your handout, you should see that there are two colors. I color coded it pink and blue or turquoise. My favorite nib nine is Hunt 101. Although it didn't used to be that way because I have a really heavy hand. It took some time for me to transition to Hunt 101. Okay, so the path that I want your right tine to follow is the blue or the turquoise path, and the pink one is the path for your left tine. I hope I don't get too confused with saying left and right, but yeah. Okay. Also, these are just guides. You can change your heft or the thickness of your shade. You don't necessarily have to press too hard to get this much thickness, but I do want you to pay attention to what your left and your right tines are doing. This is just a basic guide for how your tines work with this basic stroke. Okay, the first thing that I want you to do before we tackle the first shade is to put your nib on the paper. Okay, from my view, the nib is aligned to my slant. Let me look at the camera. Yeah, it looks aligned there as well. Put your nib aligned to your slant and then press evenly on both tines. Maybe I should zoom in so you can see. Notice what happens to the two tines of your nib when you press evenly. It sort of like forms a curve. Let me draw over it so you can see. It forms like a curve like that. Now, this is a tip that I learned from my teacher, Nina. What happens if you rotate your nib to the right? Like from this is my initial position, rotate it a little bit to the right, and then leave your right tine on the page so that when you splay out, press on your nib. What do you get? Ideally, you're getting the same thing as my nib here, which is a straight line. The next thing that you will notice is, yeah, you got a flat top, but it's not quite horizontal. You might have to play with your pen angle. So what I do, I mean, if you got the horizontal right away, that's perfect. But if you haven't, then what I do is I usually raise my pen higher. Not quite vertical, but just a little bit higher so that when I do that, my right tine stays in place and my left tine spreads in a horizontal line to the left. There's a few different ways to do your squared tops, but this is the way that really unlocked it for me. So let's do that again now, this time with this guide here. I want you to start on the upper right corner and then rotate your nib a little bit, raise it a little bit higher, and see what sort of setting or setup for your nib results at a straight line here. And then now what I would usually do is I put it back on my original position of the two tines being evenly spread out. And this is a full pressure stroke that you are supposed to maintain the same type of pressure from top to bottom. So just drag your nib along the slant. Okay, I am a little bit off the guide. That's okay. And then do it slowly. Once you get to the baseline, release your right tine to let it meet with the left. You might have to retouch it with ink later on, and you can also do that quickly, like snap it like that. Try whatever works for you later with ink. So I just want you to get used to the motion of spreading your tines, going down with even pressure, and then closing your right tine, meeting it with the left. For this basic stroke, I want you to keep in mind that it is a parallelogram wherein the left and the right sides are parallel to each other and to your main slant. And you have flat tops ideally, but don't worry if you don't get them right away. It takes some practice, some mindful practice to get that. Let's see. The next shade that I want you to practice is the underturn shade. So same thing, do the same thing for your squared top here. So I will rotate my pen, spread it like so, and then maintain even pressure, and you will need to taper it to the right. So start releasing pressure and taper to a point. By the time that you reach the baseline, your tines should be closed to a point. And it's up to you how high or low you want to start tapering. And it's also up to you how, if you want to curve this a little bit, like the exemplar from Lupfer in page 2. But for right now, let's focus on how it feels. Now, let's do the opposite. We will start with a point and we will end with the same width or the same heft as your two other strokes here. Um, Again, play with your pen angle or your nib rotation. Sometimes I feel like it's easier for me if I rotate it now a little bit, just a tiny bit to the left. But if it works for you, wherein your nib is just flush flat like this, then that's perfect. So this time you need to gradually increase the pressure from a hairline or like a dot. Gradually add pressure and then maintain it till you reach the bottom. And the next stroke is your compound curve. Um, Between these two strokes, by the way, the underturn and the overturn, maintain that rotational symmetry. When you rotate this upside down, you should get the same exact shape. And for this one, this is just a combination of the two. You end and start with a point. You have even width in the middle. So you should have curves here and here. So let's start with a point, gradually add pressure, do it slowly, and then lift pressure, release. Okay. The next shade is what we use for your oval letters. Um, let's see. So this example also has a straight edge here, but later on when you do your basics or your letters, you could curve it a little bit if you prefer. So start with a point and keep your right tine straight for now, and just let your left tine do the shade, travel the pink line. There are a couple of um there is one more option. Let me just draw it. For your oval shades, you might see in some exemplars that the weight or the thickest part of it is slightly lower than the center, like so. And the idea is like if you started with your shade horizontal and the thickness being in the middle, you don't just, you could either rotate it, you know, like a whole shape, rotate it like that, you will get this one, or you could distort it in a way like you're keeping the foot here but stretching the top there, and what that happens is it distributes the weight, it stretches the top and puts all the weight a little bit below center. So you could do either style, see how that feels. Like instead of putting pressure right away, do it more gradually, put the thickest part a little bit below center. So it's up to you. This next stroke is the reverse of the first one. It also looks like a crescent shape. And this time it's your left tine that stays pretty much on the same line. We only use this on a few letters, specifically for S, and then a version of X and Z. Um, Again, between the two, maintain symmetry, keep them, they're essentially the two sides of your oval, but we'll get to that later. The next couple of strokes I have here is for your upper loop and your lower loop. What I want you to think about while doing it is to gradually increase the pressure here, slowly, slowly, until you reach the same thickness of what you have established on the other basic strokes. And then, similar to how we did our flat bottoms earlier, release your right line and let it meet your left. So now, flat top, slowly relieve your pressure until you get to a point. You might want to experiment with the transition of your pressure later. You might not want it to be longer. You might want the shade to last longer or to last shorter. It will be up to you. Let's see. Oh, just also make sure that both your left and right have even pressure, and that will result to smooth sides on both ends. Now for the two rows here, let me just pull my camera back. We will, I mentioned it earlier, we will do two families of basic strokes. One is a more rounded turn, and one has a more angular turn coming from, like Howe or Jones. So the first stroke stays the same for all of them. Let me grab a couple of um, pens. Okay. Okay. So I mentioned earlier our hairlines. For our hairlines, always think that they are part of an arc or part of an oval rather. So if I were to draw a more rounded turn at the bottom and keep it symmetrical, keep the upstroke pretty much on the same slant, but still thinking that it is part of an oval, this is what I will end up with. And then we're going with a rounded look here, so I'll do the same for my overturn. And combine the two. Ideally, you're keeping the same width as well. And then for your oval, since you see how rounded these are and how thick your how thick or how wide your width is, I imagine I would end up somewhere here. So if I were to draw, let me just draw it this way, but we're actually going the other way later. Okay. And for the reverse oval shape, I'm not going to draw the whole oval. I'm going to draw something like, oh yeah, actually, I'm going to draw this exact same shape, hairline, because we don't really have letters that do that full oval shape. And then for the loops, I want you to imagine, okay, this is really big, so it might look funny. I want you to imagine this oval being able to fit here at the top. How big is it? Maybe one. Let's do one unit of that space. And let's trace over, let's do a teardrop shape. So your teardrop shape looks like this. And what I want you to aim for is smooth curves on both ends. The angularity or the roundedness at the top is similar to the angularity or the roundedness of all your other strokes. So just gonna trace over that and meet my shade. And then do the same for your lower loop. Imagine the same roundedness. Okay, so this is our first style of basic strokes, the really rounded one. It's a little bit exaggerated, but that's okay. For the second style, let's do a more angular turn. Let me grab different color, maybe blue. Okay, so at the bottom, instead of your pen traveling on the horizontal that much, turn it right away and then open it a little bit more. This is still an arc of an oval, and it's opening up from narrow to wide. So let's do the same. Keep the symmetry for your overturn, and then for your compound curve or double turn. Okay, that might be too sharp. That's okay. Let's keep going. For your oval shape, what's it gonna look like? I want you to think about how much curvature you did here and how much curvature you did here. How will that look like in an oval shape? You might not necessarily keep the same shade. You might want to opt for something that looks like this. Let's see. If I drew something like that and we want it to be symmetrical, your oval might look something like this. So the idea is it's still the same roundedness at the top and at the bottom, like so. And the width of this oval is ideally still close to your other shades. And then we'll repeat the same curve here, same as this one. And then now for your loop, imagine this, transpose it to here. Keep the same curvature at the top and at the bottom. So it's gonna look narrower at the top. And it might even bend a little bit from your slant line. There's a lot more space here, and the turn is more angular over there. Let's do the same for the bottom. Okay, so this is our second look. Now, before I dip my pen in ink, just really quickly, you could imagine this being part of an oval like so. A really elongated oval. And even this one, actually, you could say that this is an intersection of two ovals, the same oval ideally that you've been drawing on your other strokes. For this one, your oval is a bit more slanted and a bit more open. You can imagine it even going over your shade like so. And that's completely fine as long as you keep the same look for all your other shades. I'm gonna send you a digital version of this. Like I did a similar illustration but in Procreate, so it looks actually nicer. But for now, I hope you're able to imagine what we're going for. So this oval right here is on the same slant. This might not be on the same slant, and that's completely okay. So, all right, time to get our pen and ink. Dip it in ink. Let's do these basic strokes, these 8 basic strokes, and I want you to choose where you're leaning towards. Do you lean more, do you like the more angular look or the more rounded look? I will go for something that's a little bit in the middle between the two. And for the full pressure stroke, we might as well practice it in 3 spaces because we will use it in letters like P. I think that's the only letter. Yeah, P. Keep that same heft from top to bottom, and it's okay if you want to retouch your nib or your flat bottoms. Next stroke, the underturn shade. It's up to you if you want to do it in one motion or if you want to lift at the baseline. to give yourself a break and time to recuperate. And again, for precision, it might help you to lift at the baseline and then imagine, okay, what kind of oval do I want to create? Okay, so I ended up with an angular one, and I'll try to replicate that same angularity when I do my overturn. And I will combine these two strokes to get the compound curve or the double turn. So same angularity, maintain the shade, and ideally this shape has the same negative space at the top and at the bottom. And before I do my my next hairline, I'm looking at my underturn over here. Okay, and next is our oval. So I will make it a little bit pointier. Then for the reverse, it's just like an overturn, but I will taper at the bottom. That's a little off slant, but that's okay. And then for the upper and lower loop. So imagine a teardrop shape that you're tracing. It's up to you when you want to start adding pressure and maintain the even heft. And this is a little bit more angular than I'd like it to be, or rounded rather. So let's try another one that will match our family better. Then do the same for your lower loop. Okay. Let's see. Let's try. I mentioned the oval earlier. The two different styles that you could do, which has which depends on your personal preference. If you want the shade to be evenly distributed, like this one, or you want it to be, this one is super obviously weighted low, but that's up to you. Like, look at where the thickest part of your shade is. This one is pretty even. This one is also pretty even, but I also started with a lot of hairline. So that will be up to you. And let me also go over a few different ways of executing the upper loop and the lower loop. And then we will take a quick break. So the first um, execution that I will do is I will do it in one stroke. You could do it like that, or you could split it because it's such a big stroke, and it might be helpful to split it in two. So I will do the shade first. Start somewhere here, gradually increase the pressure. So this one I did in one stroke. This is my first stroke. You could do the second stroke upwards and meet your shade somewhere here. So, and the third option that you could do is to do this next or the second stroke downwards, and you can add a little tiny bit of accent shade at the curve there. So what I like to do is I go over the shade, lightly retrace it. Oops, okay, I'm dragging lint on my paper. So let me do that again. 1, 2, accent. You will see this in some exemplars. Um, and I think I like it if I like to put it if there's not a lot of shade at the top. Like if I have a lot of hairline and my shade starts late, then there's really nothing much going on at the top. In order for your eyes to get drawn, for your attention to get drawn at the top, it's nice to have a little bit of accent shade over here. What I do want you to remember when you're doing this type of shade is aim for both the inside and the outside of your hairline to be smooth. Okay, now let me do the lower loops this time. I'll just put it here, one stroke, two strokes. You could lift. Think about the next shape that you're doing. Retrace a little bit. My cat, yeah? Maybe my cat wants to go out. Okay, and you could add a tiny accent shade over there. So start from here instead. And when you come to the bend, press a little on your nib. So 1 and 2. Try to join it as seamlessly as possible wherever you decide to join your stroke. Okay, it is 9:47. We will take a quick 5-minute break. Go ahead and grab your tea, go to the bathroom, drink water, and we will be right back. Okay, so for those of you who are watching the recording, this part might be a little weird because after I did the break, I accidentally left the view in gallery mode. So I am re-recording the parts where I did the letters of the alphabet, the letter groups. But don't worry, we will still arrive at the same result that I did this morning. Okay, so go ahead and grab the guide sheet, this guide sheet. I like this one because of the gaps that we have, or that I added here, the gray gaps. And each 5 spaces signify one row. For engrosser script, the ratio that I am using is 2:1:2. 2:1:2. This is where my letters will sit. My X height is 8 millimeters. And this is baseline, header line, first ascender, second ascender, first descender, second descender. So my loops will extend 2 spaces tall. This is where our short letters will sit, and my lower loops also extend to 2 spaces long. And side by side, while I'm gonna write the letters over here, I will have this exemplar on the side. One thing to note on this page, I had created it at originally the same size of that guide sheet, which is 8 millimeters. I blew it up to more than twice of its size so that it's easier to study. And the way that we're tackling the alphabet is we will study them by the groups, and we will group them by the basic strokes. And it's more efficient to study them that way because your hands, your fingers will get used to the motions of the basic strokes. Okay, so the first letter group that we have here is I, U, and W. So I'm gonna use highlighters or markers. You could use colored pens. It's up to you. and we will study each letter in detail. Okay, so the first stroke of letter I is your entry stroke, which is the bottom right of your oval. Always remember that all our hairlines are part, or most of our hairlines are part of an oval. So you could imagine this being part. Oh, my marker is drying up. I accidentally left them open as well. Okay, so that's gonna be your entry stroke, and then for your exit stroke, make sure that it is as parallel as you can get it to be, um, to your uh entry stroke. Okay, give me 1 second. Let me just change the tips. Okay, so imagine that you are transposing the same oval, and again, it doesn't matter what size or orientation your oval is, as long as you're consistent with your choices. Um, Imagine that you are just transposing the same oval, and you are using the same arc of that oval for your exit stroke. As for the dot of the eye, make sure that it is aligned to your main stroke over here. And as for its position, so this is our header line. So I erased the first ascender line, but it will be somewhere here. It's easier for me to remember where to put it. I just choose the middle part. Um, so it's up to you if you want it lower or higher, but consider that you in order to be consistent with your letters, you will encounter this dot again in letter J. So when you get to letter J, make sure to look back on your eye and place it in the same position. As for the heft or the thickness of this shade, you could use the same heft as your main stroke or make it thinner, but I personally prefer it to be the same shade, same heft, because if it's any thinner, it might lose its legibility. Just don't make it too thick, or don't make it thicker than your main shade, your shade. Now for the letter U, um, same thing. When you're looking at your hairlines, make sure that they are parallel to each other. And then for your curvatures, let me just uncap my markers. For the curvatures at the bottom, or for your turns, make sure that they're also as similar as possible. When we go to the W, same thing. And for the spacing, look back at how much space you've already established in your other letters. That will be your 1 unit of spacing. And then what's new here is the blind loop. We call this the blind loop because it's a loop, but we shade it in. So its position is to the left. If I were to continue this hairline over here, the position of that blind loop is to the left of that hairline. And then the way that you would exit it, try to mimic your curvature over here. So I would probably, if I were to redo it, I wouldn't open it as much. I wouldn't open it that wide, probably something like that, to mimic how curved I did that. And one thing to keep in mind when you're exiting is try to maintain that seamless connection on the outer part of that shade into that exit hairline. Let's see. As for the height or the length or the position rather of this exit stroke, it's the way that I did it is maybe a third or more than a third here. It would depend because sometimes if you have an E next to it, you might want to dip it lower. Um, but I personally prefer it somewhere in the middle between one third to one half. No, not one half, one fourth to one third. Um, and for the blind loop, the way that you would do it, you could think about it as half of an oval or half of a heart shape like that. Well, sort of like a soft, no corners for that heart. Two ways to do that blind loop. So exit, so that hairline, and then retrace. Okay, let me do that again. So last part of your W, half of an oval, fill it in, or you could do an underturn shade, similar to just a mini version of that. Um, what else? Okay, yeah, that's what we need to make note of for these for the first group of letters. And I will go back to my page over here. And let's write I, U, and W. That's a little off slant, but that's okay. Let's keep going. Pretend that this is your slant. Make sure that your dot is aligned to your main shade. Then let's correct the slant for the next letter. So what I would do is I will rotate my paper a little bit and get a feel for my slant if it aligns with my natural finger movement. Okay, you can lift or not depending on your personal preference. Replicate that same shade, same thickness, and um, same slant. Then let's do W, which is essentially your U, but with a blind loop at the end. And then right where you ended, exit from that same point with a similar curvature as the bottom. Okay, then the next group of letters are N, M, and I have three versions of R on the page. All right, so your N here, if you turn your letter I upside down, try to replicate that same curves and that same heft and also the same negative space. So if I were to draw an oval here, ideally it's the same oval as what we used earlier. Then it's the same oval here, just transposed. And here as well, although this last oval is a little bit more rounded than the others. So try to maintain that same angularity here, here, and here, and maintain parallel curves. For the M, essentially it's the same thing. You just have an extra overturn. I would pay attention to the spacing, same unit of spacing. The other two can be adjusted if you're connecting them to a certain letter that requires this to be a compound hairline. But as it is, M typically on its own requires 4 units of spaces. Now, got 3 different versions of R. You've got your overturn. This part is new. This is a straight stroke. It's slightly off slant because the next shade that you're gonna do is to the left of that straight stroke that you did, and you need to give that blind loop some allowance to breathe. As for the height of it, I wouldn't put it too low, and also I wouldn't start the hairline here or the upstroke here too low as well, because we don't want this to be mistaken for a V. The blind loop, this is the same thing that we did for W, and the same exit stroke. For this version of R, so again, this is just your overturn, and this one, imagine that you are tracing an oval that is the same oval that you have used here. So the way that you would do it is go up and then create a dot and fill it in. The dot is inside of that curve. Now for the exit stroke, you could choose to lightly retrace or just start somewhere here, and imagine it being an egg oval, like where one is a sharper end than the other. And the way that you curve here, you could adjust it depending on the way that your other letters look. What I mean by that is, if you have a more angular turn for your overturn, you have a more angular turn over here as well. And for your exit, you might want to do an angular turn or curve here instead of a really rounded one. For the last version of R, what I talked about here in W, you could utilize the underturn shade as your exit, but this time you'll notice that last shade is to the left of this upstroke here. So in that case, you could keep this straight stroke as parallel as you like to your main stroke. Try to see and experiment how that looks like for you. As for how low it is, I wouldn't put it too low, would affect the legibility, and I would just keep it as low as I did the other versions of your R over here. All right, so next group of letters, N, M, and 3 versions of R. So when I'm doing my N, or when you're doing your N, look at your I and try to maintain that same curves. And I started that stroke somewhere in the middle, because it's easiest for me to remember. Ideally, what would have happened here is because this is off slant, I would have met, if this were on slant rather, I would have met it earlier, right in the middle, something like this. So whatever option you choose, whether you want to start meet them higher, you would meet you would start your hairline lower. But if you have something like this, it will be more consistent for you to keep the symmetry. When you rotate it, you will start in the middle. And M, same spacing. Oops, I overshot a little bit there. That's okay, let's continue. And then the three versions of R. First, so overturn, and then I'll start somewhere in the middle. You can slant it a little bit to the right, blind loop, and curve out. Second version, we will trace an oval, create a dot, go back, and finally, for this letter group, another straight stroke. Let me just clean my nib a little. Okay. Another straight stroke, and we will exit with a flat top, a little bit of an underturn shade. Okay. Next group of letters, use the compound curve, which we already tackled in the second half of N and the last part of M here. We've got V and X. So yeah, this is essentially just your compound curve. And make this as similar as you can as how you did it with your W. What I want you to pay attention to are your curvatures, as always. Make it as curved, the curves as similar as possible. And the length, or the how low you dip it, make it as similar as possible to your W. Now for the X, so you will first do your compound curve, and once you have that on the page, what I would do is I look at the negative space in between the hairline and the shade. So I try to meet the middle. I target where the middle is. So the middle of that, and the middle. And I will lift before and after the shade so that I don't pull it out of the shade and make a mess. And I will execute this stroke downwards so that I can add that tiny little bit of accent shade there. And it helps with the legibility too if you have that tiny accent here as opposed to just a hairline. But feel free to also try this with a hairline, and you could do it from bottom to up as well. Let's see. And while I go down from here to here, I am looking at my curvature here. How did I exit? How did I enter? And try to keep it as parallel as you can to give that sense of harmony on your letter. It's not super parallel here on the page, but we will try our best to do that right now here. Letter V and X. So let me just label where my letters are gonna sit. Okay. V and X. So I'm gonna look at how I did my N and M, how much I curved there. And for the blind loop, I'm looking at my W and how low I made it. For the exit stroke, look at your curvatures there. And then X. Compound curve first. So this is just one version of X. We have another later. And look at where your middles are. I'll start somewhere here. Add a little bit of shade. Lightly press and then continue with the hairline. Go to the middle of that shade. Oops, that ink pulled a little. And lift. And the next group is going to be the ovals. ROCNA. Okay. Um, the first part of the O, that is just your entry stroke the, that we've been using for most of our letters. Use the same oval, imaginary oval that you've chosen earlier. Maintain that same curvature. But this time though, we are going over the header line. So the amount of shade that you put in there will be up to you, but I wouldn't put it too high because it's going to look funny and it might affect, it might not, it might take away your attention from the overall letter if you put it too high. And as for the heft, I usually like it to be less thick or a little bit thinner than your main shade, but whatever choice that you choose, make sure to apply that same heft to your letter S later on. Okay, so first you're gonna enter with a right curve here from your imaginary oval. Create a blind loop over the header line. Create or draw a horizontal line, which is, I think, the first time. Yes, it is the first time that we've drawn a horizontal line on our letter. The length of it, you're gonna have to experiment, but I'll tell you in a second um, how I check my work basically. And then this is your oval shade. And when you exit, make sure that you're looking at how you enter the letter and make it as parallel as possible to each other. So when you're exiting too, imagine that you still have that 1 unit of spacing from your oval, similar to how we used it for your R here. Okay, so you will notice that the space here is wider than the space here. And the way that I think about it, if this is my ending point and this is my starting point, can I superimpose a compound curve such that the shade actually falls in the middle of that compound curve? So something like this. So follow whatever curvature that you need or that you've been following for your entry hairline, and then create as much horizontal line here until up to the point wherein when you apply the shade, you could imagine that a compound curve will have that shade here. As you exit here, that same spacing here will be implied here on the other side. So that's how I check my letter R. The next letter is O. So as Lupfer in the second page illustrated, your O, ideally, if you superimpose an I here, this is just the same, it has the same features as your letter I or your undertone shade. Now, we are not going to go all the way up on your entry hairline. We're going to stop here because if you continued all the way up to the header line, there isn't any shade here to cover it up. Your next stroke will be an oval. And when you curve on your ovals, watch out at the bottom, at the top, make it as similar as possible as your underturn as well, and overturn. So as for the space, ideally you could fit this same oval to your letter U in the middle. And the blind loop here is the same thing that we've been using. Um, we've been using in the other letters like W and V. The only difference is that because it's sitting to the left of a curved hairline, it doesn't quite look exactly the same, but its characteristics should be the same, meaning the heft should be the same as how you did it for your W. The shape should be the same, like imagining a half oval here. um and even it's going to sit a little lower too because we didn't start from the header line. And when you exit here, look at how curved you made it here, and imagine even just fitting an oval at the top. There's a couple of letter O's here that are two different styles. Um that are different styles from here because they have different connectors or exit stroke. So this is the standard one, I would say. And this second one, I usually see it, or the only letters that I would see it connected to would be something that belongs to this group, the N, M, R here. Because exiting it this way, and again, this is still part of an oval. Like imagine this being parallel to this because you could draw an oval here. But yeah, this type of exit stroke is usually used for when you're connecting it to an N because sets it up nicely. You don't have to change directions. And what I mean by that is because when you have a letter that ends with an exit stroke like this, let me grab a pencil. When you have a letter that exits like this and another letter that begins like an N begins with a top left curve, the connection that you need, the letter connection that you need to draw on the page is a compound hairline like so, taking the bottom part of this and the top part of this. It looks funny. Let me draw that again. And with this type of connection, just a side note, imagine being able to fit two ovals in there. And those two ovals, it's more pleasing to look at if it's the same size oval. Like don't curve too much on one end and too little on the other. So that's the normal connector between O and something like N, but you could use this one if it's easier for you. For So this is usually for N. The next one, you could use this for S and R, which we will tackle later. Well, I guess, yeah, this R is what I mean. For S, we will show it later, but instead of expressing half, this is sort of like more than half or half of an oval. This time you're just exiting with less than half of an oval. but it is still an arc. As for the accent that you see here, the accent shade, you could add that after the fact, after you've completed the oval. Just be careful that when you do it, make sure that the inside curve and the outside curve are both smooth. Oops. Okay, let me just try to slide my paper in so you can see the rest of the letters. Hold on. Okay, C, E, and A. So what do we need to watch out for C? So again, you're only entering halfway. When you're exiting the letter, make sure that you're looking at your entry and keeping it parallel. And this should look familiar. We've used this up for your R over here. You are just retracing. So first I would do the shade and then I would retrace up top, retracing an oval that you can fit here. What else? Next is E, same entry stroke. We've got a teardrop shape here, which is essentially the same shape that we did earlier in the basic strokes for the loops. There is a tiny accent shade here that I like to produce by going downwards on the loop instead of going upwards and then adding it later. What else? Opportunity for harmony here is by making these parallel. And one thing that you might want to watch out for is the meeting point. So try to meet it, try to end your loop or begin your loop here at a place that makes sense according to where you ended this entry stroke. So what do I mean by that? Don't go all the way up. This is your shade, and then your loop goes down here. Don't, because it's not gonna make sense for you why your entry stroke ended there and your loop ended there. It's supposed to be one. Ideally it should look like it's as if you passed through the shade, or the shade passed through that hairline. Yeah, if I were to correct it, I would probably curve it a little bit over here. um so don't do this, but you can meet it at the same level or lower. So let's see. This is pretty much the same level. If we were to meet it lower, something like this, here and here. um yeah, for the teardrop shape, after creating the shade, I would go down and add that accent. So if this is your teardrop shape, this is part of the shade, I would go down that way and add the accent. Then for the letter A, I would watch out for the parallel curves over here. This is essentially your oval plus your underturn. Okay, so let's write the oval group R, O, C, E, and A. Let me just double check that I am not on mute. Yeah, okay. Um, Entry hairline, same as how you did your letter I, but this time going over the headline. Let me just clean my nib because the ink has dried up a little. Um, okay. over the header line, a little blind loop, same as how you've been doing the W and R, but this time over the header line. Fill it in. I like it to be a little bit thin. And then do the horizontal line, traveling along the header line, and your oval shade, and then exit. While exiting, look at your entry stroke and keep it as parallel as possible. Next is the letter O. For your entry stroke, don't go all the way to the header line. Just do half of it. Oval shade, and then blind loop. Exit with the same curvature that you used at the bottom. And next letter is C. Shade first. And retrace like how we did with letter R over here. But this time we're coming from a shade. Imagine that you are tracing an oval, the same oval that you used for letter O. And create that small dot inside that curve. Letter E. Create your teardrop shape loop. And letter A, which is your oval plus your underturn. Let's see if we can do the two other styles of letter O on the page, which has a tiny bit of accent on the top right curve, and two different styles of exit strokes that you could try. So I would finish the oval first. I prefer to create my O's in a or finish the oval in an upstroke, and then you could just very, very lightly add your accent shade over here. And the first exit that I have on the page sets you up to connect it with an N, and just retrace an arc that is same as your arc on this part of the O. Second style of O, or rather third, accent shade. Try to keep both inside and outside of that shade as smooth as possible, and you can exit it this way. Imagine adding an S after. Okay, next set of letters is or has the reverse oval shape for letters S, X, and one style of Z. So for letter S, just imagine or look at your letter C, turn it upside down. That is the same exact shape that you want to reproduce. And that implies that what oval you're using here on C is the same oval that you should be able to imagine fitting inside your S. Same curvature and same slant of that oval. What else? Regarding your hairlines for your S, oops, let me just fix it. Keep it as parallel as possible to each other. And when you're exiting the bottom, try to keep it as smooth as you can. Coming out of that curve over here at the bottom, instead of like creating something with a dent like that. And then this is the same blind loop that you would have used in your R up there. Try to keep it with the same, try to have the same thickness. This is a little too thin compared to the R, but that's okay. We'll redo it on the page anyway. And as there is a slight S curve shape here on the outside and here as well, something like that. And again, how high or how tall you want this part of the S depends on you, but I would keep it consistent with your R over there. Now the X, this second version of the X that we're doing utilizes the same crescent shade. This time you have this second part here. Just imagine that you are able to fit the same size oval for both parts, and make sure that you have as much hairline as as you can once you reach the baseline over here. I like to lift somewhere here so that to avoid so that I can avoid the ink pooling. Now for Z, we haven't really discussed the lower loops yet, but we'll get to that later. This is the first style of Z that we have on the page. Imagine this is just the same, you're able to fit the same size oval here, and this part is new, the loop that you're doing near the baseline. I like it, I like to keep it on slant just to keep it consistent with all our other letters being on slant, but you could also keep it horizontal. um and try not to have too much shade in there because it will look like a mess. As for the lower part of the Z, you could imagine this being part of your oval, and then you're just shading the right side of it. When you're exiting, imagine you're just creating a teardrop shape and that you're able to fit an oval over here. Ideally, it's the same size oval up top. And exit the same way that we've been exiting earlier with a right curve. Okay, S, X, and Z. I'm gonna use the third row now. So before I enter the S, I'm looking at my R, seeing how high I did that. Entry stroke and line loop at the top. Okay, my ink is drying so fast tonight or today. Okay, and line loop. Try to do that little S curve at the top. Have hairline at the bottom. And with a dot, similar to how you did your C, but this time we're doing at the bottom. And exit as carefully as you can, keeping that hairline parallel to your entry stroke. Next is letter X. Hairline, curve, terminal dot. And then before I do the next half of it, I try to look at the overall shape that I did here and imagine it upside down. That's how you want to do the other half, but this time without the shade. And you can lift or just try to do it as carefully and as close as you can to the shade without ruining it. And then do the same dot, same size dot ideally, Let me make that a little bigger. Next is your Z. Hairline, loop, teardrop shape, and exit. Okay. Next set of letters are the stemmed letters, T, D, and P. Let me just grab the next page. So as I mentioned earlier, we are doing a 2:1:2 ratio for engrosser script, where loops reach up to two ascender heights. For TD and P, the standard is just to reach up to one. This part over here is 1x height taller than your short letters. Some exemplars have it shorter, but it's up to you if you want to follow that. My advice would be to have an extra guideline there if you don't want to utilize the whole 2x heights for your stemmed letters. The new thing here is the crossbar, the horizontal crossbar. I like to lift just so I don't drag the shade, but if you do that, try to make sure that it looks like one straight line. As for the length of it, it's up to you how long you do it, as long as it doesn't interfere with the next letter. Like I wouldn't go over this line over here. And I like to position this crossbar around the middle. Imagine if I were to have an eye here, I like them to be on the same level. For your letter D, you could think about it as your A with an extended stem, one space high, and the thing to maintain here is your pressure all the way down up until the up until the point where you taper your shade for your underturn. For your P, I've got two styles here. The one at the bottom is utilizing the same crescent shade that we just did with S and X, while this one is the more traditional engrosser script P, which has a full pressure stroke spanning 3 spaces high and just ending with your compound curve. This is still the same exact entry stroke that we've been using. I would watch out for these to be parallel and your curvatures to be same. And yeah, again, this spans one excite high and another excite high. This version of me, same thing. I would watch out for the hairline, and I would try to exit the bottom as seamlessly as possible, and make your unit oval consistent with the other spaces that you've been using. The one thing that I would edit or retouch here is the thickness of this second stroke. It's a little thinner than the first one. Ideally, the thickest part of this would match how thick we've established the heft here. Okay, let's write these letters, T, D, and P. Exit the same way you entered, and then crossbar, horizontal line. And next is D. When you're doing your D, look at your A, see how you did your curves. And for your P, this is the longest full pressure stroke that you would ever do, which is 3 spaces tall. Maintain even pressure, and then exit with a compound curve, and try to keep the same spacing as with your other letters. Um, let's see. With the other version of P, okay. Next group is the loops, L, B, F, H, and K. So upper loops. The loops extend to X heights, oh, on top of the short letter. U, for example, you could imagine this could be an I. And you have your teardrop shape that we practiced earlier with your basic strokes. Things to watch out for: curvature here, mirror it there, and your entry and exit hairlines being parallel. And once you decided on where to transition your shade from thin to thick over here, so I did it somewhere here, try to maintain that same transition point for all your other letters, like here for B, as well as your lower loops when you turn it upside down for letters like J. When you're doing the shade, as your nib presses down, try to maintain even pressure on both sides of the tine to get smooth edges on both sides. One thing that I wanted to talk about here is the gap that you see between the header line and where the start of the loop is. There's a gap over here. And the reason for that, I think it's easier for me to explain if I show it with J. Let me just grab my letter J. Where is it? Oh, there it is. Okay. So for your letter J, lower loop this time, um, we will always exit the letter from the baseline over here. And in order for this hairline to make sense that it looks like it's one seamless hairline crossing your shade, there there will inevitably be a gap over here. So if we turn this upside down to your L, your gap is above the header line because where's our L? Yeah, to make it symmetrical with each other. Yeah, I don't necessarily pay attention to where this is, but if you want it to be more consistent, I would leave more gap over here, or rather I would meet it higher but not too high that it doesn't make sense for me. Like, okay, what I'm trying to say is try to maintain that illusion where this hairline connects to the loop in a seamless motion through the shade, and that's where the gap comes from. Okay, next is your B, which is, if we cover this up, this looks like the half of your W. Things to pay attention to are the curves here, and try to keep this as smooth as possible on the outside. For your F, we've got a few hairlines here that would look like they harmonize with each other if you keep them as parallel as possible. And it extends to 1x height lower, same length as how low you do your P here. For the H and the K, H is pretty straightforward. You've got your upper loop and your compound curve. Just watch out for how curved you do it here, here, and here. For K, this should look familiar. This shape right here, this is the same one that we used for the version of R earlier, and also with C and X. And then for the other half, this is half of your compound curve. Imagine if I were to draw it completely, it would look like this. Okay, so let's draw LBF, H, and K. And it's also up to you how you want to draw your loop, if you want to lift and draw it in two motion, but I personally prefer to do it in one motion. Teardrop shape. Okay, my teardrop shape here is a little thinner than I'd like it to be, but let's continue and try to correct that with my letter B. I'll swing wider and look at my letter W and V, how I did that blind loop and exit seamlessly, although my nib dragged some lint over there. Next letter is F. F is probably the longest letter that we have in the minuscule alphabet, spanning 4 spaces. So you might want to trace your hand over your page to make sure that it feels comfortable to complete the stroke the whole that's spanning 4 whole spaces, or you could utilize forearm movement if you like, wherein you just slide your hand or your arm across the page. Exit it the same way you entered it, and try to maintain the same transition point for all your letters. Here I added the shade a little lower than I did for the rest. Next is H and K. Oops, I started that too close. And then K. Okay, I can feel that my hand is too far. I need to move my paper. And then do the same motion that we did for letter R. Retrace, trace that imaginary oval, and then complete it with half of a compound curve. The shade is still on the same slant as your main stroke. Okay, now we are on the last group of letters, the lower loops, J, G, Y, Q, and Z. Um, okay, so remember when I talked about the dot of the I? So try to, wherever you had placed the dot earlier, whether it's the middle or higher or lower, keep it on the same level for your letter J. And for the heft, I like it to be as similar as possible to my main stroke and keep it on the same slant as well. What else? For the entry and exit, oops. For the entry and exit, keep it parallel to each other. And similar to our upper loops, if you had done your upper loops in a 2-1-2 in 2 spaces high, do the same for your lower loops, extend it to 2 spaces long at the bottom. And wherever you transitioned your shade from thin to thick earlier, whether it's in the middle here or lower, do the same for all your lower loops. For letter G, you could think about it as if you're drawing your letter A, but this time you are completing it downwards with your teardrop shape and exiting same way as we have. One thing that I would edit here is try to make this a little bit curvy and keep it as parallel as I can with other hairlines that I have here. Y, you could look at your letter H and turn it upside down. It should look exactly the same except for this part. One thing that I would note is wherever your H shade met your hairline over there, over here, I mean, try to do the same for your Y. I think here I met it too high compared to my H. Now for your Q, when you're doing it, it's essentially like imagine you're doing a G, but your the other half of it is on the other side. So if I were to draw a G here, it would look like this. And look at the shape that we have. It's like a heart that's on a slant, something like this, or an upside down heart that is on a slant. And so this you should be able to fit an oval, but on the other side, yeah, there you can still fit an oval, but it is probably going to be a tiny bit smaller or short or thinner than your regular oval because of the amount of space that you have here. Because of the slant, you have less space on the right side than on the left. When you're exiting your stroke, so I go up when you're creating this side of the curve, go all the way up to your baseline and then just change direction right on the baseline with your regular exit stroke. Mm, and we've done this version of Z. This version of Z we haven't talked about, but it is essentially your overturn with um, this bottom part here. Um, this is actually a little bit too wide. If I were to correct this, I would start it here to match all the other spacing that we've done so far. And same as how we did our Z earlier, imagine that you're just shading this oval, and how wide you want to make this would depend on how wide you've established the top. And opportunity for harmony here is to make these two strokes parallel to each other and then exit normally. The different thing here with this one is because we used an overturn shade, the bottom here is flat. Okay, so let's do the last group. um J, G, Y, Q, and Z. let me just move my stuff around so that I can move my paper up. There you go. So before doing your lower loop, look at your upper loops and see where you transitioned your shades. And try to replicate it. Okay, I didn't go all the way down. I should have. And then your dot, same as your eye. Letter G. Release pressure. Teardrop shape, gap, and exit stroke. Y, look at your H. We start with a compound curve this time. JGYQ. This time we're curving to the right. And meet at the baseline, change direction, and Z. Flat bottom. And this time, instead of having a little bit of shoulder going over the baseline, I would keep the second half of the Z, all of them below the baseline. We have done all our letters, just not in alphabetical order. Hopefully you've been able to construct it in a way that fits the basic strokes that you prefer, whether it's angular or not. And if you do want to see more exemplars or more variations of the letters, I will send you a link. I've compiled last year, I think, of all these different exemplars of different penmen. Um, it's on my website, but I will send that in an email. And before we do our Q&A, I want you to all keep in mind that your strokes, they don't have to be perfect. You just have to be consistent in your choices and follow whatever looks good for you and what feels good for your hand. And if you get frustrated that what you produce on the page isn't exactly what you aimed it to be, don't worry and don't be too hard on yourself. It will all come with deliberate practice. Your hand eventually catches up to your eye, and you just need to put in the work, practice mindfully, make notes as you go. And also sometimes when you're too zoomed in with what you're doing, you will see flaws. And try to zoom out of your work, like take a break, like take a look at it after, and sometimes you'll realize that the entire result actually ended up to be beautiful. These flaws, quote unquote, these are just to remind you that you are human. You have a human hand and you make beautiful handmade script. It's the human element that makes your script unique, and think of it as your own individual mark on your page. Okay, so we have 10 minutes remaining. I will open it up for Q&A. Feel free to unmute yourselves if you like, and I will see. Let me just look at the chat. Thank you so much. Thank you. Oh, you guys are so sweet. Um, let me see. Should I show my face? Maybe I'll show my face over here. Hmm. Okay, does anyone have any questions? Feel free to unmute. Thank you. Thank you for joining. Thank you, Laurie.
I have a question, Nancy.
Hi, Nancy.
Hi. It seems like Q is the only letter that actually comes right up to the baseline when it joins, and everything else, like G, even they go, they're a little below the baseline, and then the top part goes slightly above.
Yes.
I just find it odd, but
yeah, the way that you could think about it is you're only changing directions in the baseline, and there's really no reason for you to leave a gap. But let's see, how would it look like if we exited it lower and leave a gap? You could do that too. The only weird thing is it's not gonna be consistent with all your other exit strokes.
right.
Because all your
Yeah.
other exit
Yeah.
strokes start here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So good observation though.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, my favorite nib is Hunt 101 at the moment. And Elizabeth says, I've always struggled with squaring off and appreciate. Yeah, you're welcome. Try practicing it without ink and just always observe what your nib is doing because it's really, really helpful to understand. Debbie says, fabulous class, wonderful teacher. Thank you. You're so well explained in detail, taking us through each stroke, making it a lot less stressful than expected. Thank you so much. Yes, you can do this. Thank you, Debbie, for joining. Let's see, we have 7 minutes left. And I didn't get to show you what I did with Procreate. Let me just quickly show you what I did. And I will send it later as a PDF. When we did our family of basic strokes, just to sort of help you visualize what we were aiming for, the imaginary ovals, the roundedness of our turns. I will send you a copy of this, but also take note that you're not really meant to, trace over it. It's just meant as a guide for you to train your eyes on these imaginary ovals. Okay, and what else?
Maxi, you have a question if you can demonstrate a whole word.
Oh, okay. What word would you like?
Harshali, you have any word you want?
What should we practice? Let me grab a fresh sheet of paper to practice letter connections. So, let me grab my little cheat sheet for letter connections. I have a cheat sheet. Let me see if I can find it.
Nan has a word suggestion for you.
What
A
is it?
short word suggestion.
Oh my god, man. We'll be here all day.
Do you teach capitals later at another class?
Not yet. I still haven't developed my my Magiscule course, but it will probably come in the summer. Okay, so I have a little cheat sheet here. I mean, I have a better one in a worksheet properly, but let's see. I'll just quickly go over letter connections. Our entry and exit strokes are always going to be part of your oval. If you look at the alphabet, all our exit strokes are usually just this bottom right portion of your oval. There was only one instance wherein the O type connection to the N, this is where it's used. For the entry stroke, it's either a right curve, a full one, or a half one, or a left curve for your letter N. Now, when we are connecting letters, okay, ignore this. When we're connecting letters, we're just really taking the intersection or combining them. So I have these little formulas here, wherein if you have an entry and exit stroke being the same, just use the same thing. It's easy. If the entry stroke following your letter, you will remove the top half and retain that bottom half. Now, if you have an entry stroke that is a right curve connecting to your left curve over here, you will remove this part and combine them, forming this compound hairline. And when you do this, always imagine that you can fit two ovals here, or you can even imagine it as if it's an infinity, half of an infinity stroke, if that's better for you visually. And then if your first letter is a V or a W and you connect it with a full letter, a full entry stroke like this, just remove the bottom part, retain the top. Now, what if you have a V and an E? So you might want to dip this lower. If you have a V exiting this way and you have an E entering this way, so you will lose this and you will dip. You can, just doing this quickly, you can decide to dip it a little bit lower and then, oops, make sure to still fully express that curve as much as you can before meeting the shade. And try to end or begin your loop in a way that makes sense for where you ended this and where you started this. And then the last one is, if you have this, like a V and an N, you will drop the bottom half and you will have the tiny little version of this. Yeah, still imagine two ovals here. And this is just for the O. You will O to N connection. You will just drop the bottom half. Okay, did we have a word that you wanted to, that we can write in 2 minutes? Not the super califragilistic expialidocious. You're welcome, Harshali.
Maybe you can write the word harmony or calligraphy, or maybe
Sure.
sunshine.
Sunshine. Oh, okay. Um, what? That's a nice word to write, and difficult too because of the S. S is probably one of the more difficult letters. Okay, let me just tie my hair. Sunshine. So we have an ascender loop, no descenders. Okay. Let's start with a right curve. Go over the header line. Do a blind loop. Then do your reverse oval shade. Curve in and with a dot. Then exit carefully. Make it parallel to your entry stroke. Then do your underturn. You can lift or not lift. It's up to you. Another underturn. Okay, I'm gonna move my paper so I can maintain my slant. And we have that connection. So instead of fully doing, let me write it. Where can I write it? Here. Instead of fully doing this connection, wherein this is one oval width and another oval width, I will squeeze it a little bit tighter to maintain optical spacing between our shades. It's gonna look too wide. You're gonna have to experiment on how wide you want this to be. But if you do decide it to be two full spaces, it's going to look too wide because of the hairline that you put in the middle. Okay, let me just finish the word and we'll talk about a little bit about spacing. Compound curve, letter I, another compound connection, and move your paper. Compound curve, entry stroke, not all the way, and letter E, exit, and then loop. And let's not forget the dot of the I. Okay, so if you decide to stretch it out, it's going to look too wide. But if you decide to maintain just one oval space here, it's going to look too narrow because of the amount of hairline that you have here. Allow it to fully express itself, because it's not like you have just one hairline, one curved hairline. Your hairline curves twice, so allow it to travel properly. So it's going to be over 1 unit but less than 2 units. I hope that helps. That's too wide. Mm. Thank you, Laurie. Do we have any more questions? And then we will wrap up and I will be sending the recording. Oh, and the survey link, I could give it to you now, but I will also send it in an email. It's not mandatory to fill out, but I would love to hear what you think about the session. You're welcome, RJ. Walang anuman. Okay, I forgot you're welcome in. Oops, I sent it to Ekta. I forgot you're welcome in Tagalog. There you go. You're welcome. Okay.
You have a question from Mo.
Omo? What is
Difference
the difference?
between
So you can think about it as copperplate is a really broad umbrella term for multiple scripts, and engrosser script is just a subset of copperplate. One of the main differences that you could think or that you could pinpoint is the pen lifting motion, because we do that a lot more in engrosser script. Engrosser script has more precision to it, whereas for copperplate, it's not really the main. Copperplate can mean a lot of things. Copperplate script can mean a lot of things. But for engrosser script, precision, consistency, that's really the essence of it. Um, what else can I say between copperplate and engrosser script? There's a lot of debate between those two terms, and I can give you some links too on to read up the definitions between the two of them. Any book recommendations to read up on copperplate script or different kinds of calligraphy scripts and their history. For book recommendations, Zenarian Manual is always a good book. You could just Google Zenarian Manual. It's available for free, as well as Dr. Joe's Copperplate. The title is Copper Script in the Copperplate Style. Um, that's also for free. Um, and what else? There's a few business educator magazines that I like to refer to from Baird. I can send you links to that too. Thanks, Ekta. Are there any lefties? Ekta is a lefty.
I am
Are you
too. Yeah.
Oh yeah, Nancy. Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, you might have to experiment with your paper position if you're a
Yes.
lefty. Might be different from how I did it. Maybe please meet Kiwi. Kiwi is outside. Did you guys hear her meow earlier?
I couldn't hear.
But yeah, she's outside now. Oh, there you go. We have a few lefties. I will, Nan.
Aha.
All right. Let's see. It is 11:06. I don't want to keep everybody, but thank you so much for joining today live. I really enjoyed preparing for this class, and I've been so excited to just share it with you. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I will be sending you all a link to the recording. I promise that it will be in your inbox by tomorrow, but I'll work on it today. You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. Okay, I'm gonna stop the recording now. And